Hey guys, welcome back. Are you thinking of converting your plants into semi-hydro but you've no idea what to do, where to go, or how to even start? Well, you obviously clicked on this video because you are interested, so let's dive right into it before it gets super chatty. So before we dive into this video, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping, and that is, I am not an expert, nor am I claiming to be. I'm just going to give you the facts as to what has worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, and how I remedied when my plant was struggling. So let's get into this video. So as a first-time user who's diving into semi-hydro for the first time, you're gonna search the internet and a bunch of things are gonna pop up telling you that one is better than the other, and these are all the reasons why. And quite frankly, after 2 years of using both, I can honestly say there's no difference. There really isn't. I don't think that there's one substrate that's going to give your plant bigger leaves or that it's going to grow faster. I think it really depends on the user and how well you upkeep your plants. And what I mean by that is both substrates are going to require you to rinse them. Both substrates are going to use capillary action to wake up the water and the nutrients. And both substrates are going to require fertilizer because they are inorganic substrates. And I understand that Lechuza Ponds has slow releasing fertilizer, but eventually it's gonna run out and you're still gonna have to supplement with fertilizer anyways. So with that said, I don't really think it's a matter of which is better. I think it's more so what is going to fit your lifestyle and are you able and willing to keep up with the maintenance. So the maintenance that I'm referring to is, this is just what I do. When I get my substrates out of the bag, whether it's Leica or Lechuza Ponds, when they are sitting in the bag, they rub up on each other and they create these little dust particles that's actually no good for your plant. So specifically, if you're using a vase that has no drainage holes, when you water your plants, all that dust particle is going to sink to the bottom, and eventually your roots won't be able to absorb any water or nutrients because it's covered in dust particles. So that's no good for the plant. I highly recommend rinsing your substrates prior to use. So another upkeeping task that you have to deal with when you're using semi-hydro is how you fertilize your plants. Now, like I had mentioned, Lechuza Ponds already has low releasing fertilizer in it, so you don't really have to think about how much fertilizer you're adding, because in the first few months you can just add water and be done with it and it'll be fine. But because it's slow releasing fertilizer, eventually that is going to run out, so you will have to think about what kind of fertilizer you're going to use later, but I guess you can deal with that at a later time. So in comparison to Leica, you should actually have a running log as to how much fertilizer you've diluted. That way, each week you can increase the fertilizer dosage so that eventually it can reach the optimal level of fertilizer that you want your plant to have. And I say this because if you're not careful with how much fertilizer you're adding, you're going to run the risk of burning your roots. And if your plant is actually transitioning from soil to semi-hydro, it's going to shed the soil roots and develop water roots. And I find that water roots are more delicate and more sensitive to fertilizer than soil roots. So you don't want to wait all that time to develop all these beautiful water roots and then run the risk of killing it because you goofed and you added too much fertilizer. So when you're using Leica, just, especially if it's your first time, keep a running log as to how much fertilizer you're using. Otherwise, you're going to run the risk of burning your roots. So now in terms of availability, I do find that Leica is easier to get a hold of because you can go online, on Amazon, on IKEA, or go into a reptile store. And Lechuza Ponds is seriously always out of stock. Can never get my hands on it. This bag was a miracle. My friend actually got it for me for my birthday, and she's just a better shopper than me. So shout out to you, girl. So if you're dead set on using ponds as your semi-hydro mix, you can check out my earlier videos to see how I DIY my own ponds. But quite frankly, after 2 years now, I can honestly say you can use any type of inorganic substrate as your substrate for semi-hydro. So for example, this Monstera elbow over here, it's currently residing in Leica, pumice, and coarse perlite. All inorganic substrate, and it's doing great. So as you can see, the roots are developing very well, and this is a great segue to show you the algae buildup. And in here we also have some nutrient buildup as well on top of the LICA. So like I had mentioned, both substrates are going to cause buildup. It's just going to present itself differently. I do find that the Chusa ponds develops more algae and LICA develops more nutrient buildup, which is that white crusty bit that's sitting on top of the LICA balls. Now, with that said, you can do a couple of things to prevent the buildup. One would be using distilled water, but I'm not going to run to the store every single time that I need to water my plants. It gets expensive and I just don't have time for that. So another option is actually just flushing your plants. Obviously, if you have a self-watering container or if your plant is in a pot that has drainage holes, it's easier to just take your plant and rinse it under the sink and then just water your plants as usual. Obviously, if you have something like this, which is a vase with no drainage holes, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to just rinse it under the sink. So what I actually like to do is fill it up with water and then add hydrogen peroxide. Just give it a shake, let it sit for a little bit, and then I'll empty out the water and then just water it as usual. So another way of preventing algae buildup in a container like this, or I guess in any container, is to keep it in a cache pot. I think what I read was algae buildup is due to sunlight touching the substrates. So I don't know. I haven't tried it yet, but if I do, I'll let you know. Yeah, if I do, I'll let you know. So moving on to something that I think is incredibly important that nobody really talks about, and that is when your plant is currently in soil and it's transitioning over to semi-hydro, you're inducing root rot, and it is what it is. And the reason why you're getting root rot is because it had soil roots, because it was in soil. So when you're moving it into semi-hydro, it's gonna shed all the soil roots and then develop water roots. And here's the maintenance that I'm talking about. You're gonna have to check on your plants on a weekly basis just to make sure that the root rot is getting cleaned off and that the plant doesn't have any more of it, and you got to keep the water roots nice and clean, and then put it back in its substrate and then put it back where it was. And you got to do this over a very long period in time, just because it is what it is. If it's a fairly large plant and it has a lot of roots, it's gonna go through some things and you're just gonna have to wait it out. And yeah, you're gonna have drop leaves. Your plant's gonna look fairly sad, but once you get through that transition period, it's gonna be okay. And sometimes you may end up with just a stick, just a stump, until it develops water roots. So with that said, I had a couple of questions off of Instagram where someone asked, well, which plants do better? I wouldn't say that there's a particular plant that does better in semi-hydro, because of that transition period. I mean, I think monsteras and philodendrons do better because they have more robust roots and it's thicker. But honestly, I think that all plants are going to go through this period, especially if it's going from soil to semi-hydro. Now, what I will say is, when you have a cutting of a plant and you've water rooted it, or you started using moss to root it, then adding it to semi-hydro, it's going to work perfectly. You're not really going to have that transition period where you're going to have drop leaves, because it's a cutting. It's already trying to develop roots. It's figuring out its life and where it's going to be. So when you take a cutting of a plant, you should have something in mind already as to what kind of substrate you want to use. So for me personally, I like to use semi-hydro when I'm rooting my cuttings, because then I can see the development of the roots. If it's doing well, if it's gonna have root rot, I can catch it really quick and fix it. But I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with that because they're like, semi-hydro, I've never done it before, I don't know what to do. But honestly, when you're converting your cuttings into semi-hydro, way easier. When you're transitioning from soil to semi-hydro, that's where you're gonna get the drop leaves, and you know, it's like a whole thing of a roller coaster of emotions where you're like, why did I do that to that very expensive plant? But it is what it is. So if you're gonna try semi-hydro for the first time, take a cutting. You're gonna kind of see how it's going to be developing, and you're going to appreciate how semi-hydro works better as opposed to trying to get your plant that's already in soil, moving it into semi-hydro. So now we're going to answer some questions that was sent to me over on Instagram. If you guys don't already know, my Instagram handle is leaflet.co. Sometimes I'll post a topic and you guys can ask me any questions it is that you want, and I'll just answer it over on YouTube. So hopefully you like this little segment. If not, you can click out. So this person had asked which plants work the best in semi-hydro, and I have noticed that my alocasias actually do fairly well in semi-hydro, and I think that's just because they prefer to stay moist all the time, whereas like if it's in soil, they kind of go through like a dry out period, and that's where I get really sad leaves. So I think alocasias are the ones that do best, obviously after it's transitioned into having soil roots. After it's transitioned over to having water roots. And any of my cuttings, like this Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, it's a cutting that I had rooted in water, and now it's in semi-hydro, and it's doing fine. It did go through a period of, you know, wilting and dying, but it's fine now. This person had asked best fertilizer for both semi-hydro and soil. That's really up to you. I personally prefer the General Hydroponics Maxi Grow. It's a powder form. I just mix it in with my my water, and it's been doing fine. Honestly, I think any fertilizer will be okay for your semi-hydro. You just gotta be careful as to how much it is that you're adding. So remember, weekly fertilize your plants weekly. Start very low, and then you can gradually increase to the optimum level of fertilizer that you want to use. Algae problems, how to fix. So like I had mentioned earlier and in my previous videos, I had said that if you develop algae, you can soak it in water and hydrogen peroxide, shake it up a little bit, and then you can rinse it out. You will have to do this several times to remove all the algae. Now, another suggestion that I had mentioned earlier in this video was to keep it away from direct light, and hopefully that will reduce the algae. I personally haven't tried it, but that's what I was told, so I'll try it out and let you guys know. Do you always keep water in there with LICA? I think what you're asking is, do I always ensure that there's some sort of water reservoir? So now to answer this question, it really depends. It depends on what kind of pot it is that you have. So if you have a self-watering pot, you can obviously add water to it and make sure that there's always some sort of like reservoir of water in it, and that wick will constantly wick up water and keep its substrates wet. Now, moist, not wet. So now if it's in a vase with no drainage holes, then the answer is no. I don't always leave water in here because I have this fear that it's going to develop root rot if I consistently have water just sitting in here. And because there's no drainage holes, I can't guarantee that I've rinsed the substrates well enough so that there's no dirt in here. So I don't leave water in here to sit. What I'll actually do is I'll fill it up and then I'll let it sit for a couple of hours, and then I'll dump out the remainders of the water, especially if I've already seen that all the substrates is wet or moist in this case. But yeah, I don't always leave water in my no drainage pots, but in my self-watering pots there is water because that wick is going to be able to control how much water is being used up by the plant. If you want to try LICA or ponds, are there particular plants to take to those well for a first timer? Like I had said earlier, your best bet is probably to try a cutting, because then you can water root it and then add it to your choice of substrate, and you're going to be able to see it grow. But obviously if you're transitioning from soil to semi-hydro, you're going to go through a transition period and it might deter you away from semi-hydro, so try a cutting first. Is it normal to have root rot? Yes it is. Is LICA edible? No. Please don't try to eat it. What else? How often do I water? I water my plants on a weekly basis. I just walk around my plants every now and then, check it out, and if it's looking kind of dry, I'll give it some water. Most of my plants are on a schedule, and that's just because I have a very controlled environment, so I know when it needs watering. So the next question is, do you find any difference in semi-hydro using wicking pots or sitting in a reservoir? I think what she means is, do I think that there's a difference between using a self-watering pot versus a pot with no drainage holes? And my answer is yes, especially if you're a beginner. There's a huge benefit in using the self-watering pots. Now hear me out. This is super fancy. It looks very nice. It is convenient in some ways, but if you're starting out for the first time, please get yourself a self-watering pot, because it's going to teach you and make you more accustomed to all the maintenance that you have to do, in the sense that you have to flush the substrate every now and then. You have to be mindful of how much fertilizer you're using. If you're a forgetful person and you forget to water your plants, then at least with the wick, there's always going to be some sort of reservoir of water, so it's constantly going to wick up water for your plants. So yeah, there is a huge difference in using self-watering pots versus no drainage hole pots, because it's just more convenient. It's easier for you to learn and be accustomed to the maintenance of semi-hydro. But once you understand your plant, and once it gets through that phase of, you know, root rotting, you can transition over to no drainage, and it's super easy. Honestly, I think that a lot of people stress out because they don't want to kill their plants due to overwatering. But once it's transitioned over and you understand your plant and you're more comfortable with it, it'll be okay. I promise, it'll be okay. It'll be scary, but it'll be okay. So that's all for today. I hope you guys found this video helpful. And yeah, if you enjoyed these little Q&As, drop a comment down below and give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.